The silence in the saloon that afternoon in Tombstone, Arizona Territory, 1882, was not the peaceful kind. It was the silence of a woman who had screamed herself mute, and every soul in that dusty town knew it. Eliza Hartwell stood behind the bar of the Silver Dollar Saloon, her hands moving with practiced efficiency as she poured whiskey and wiped down glasses, her face a careful mask that revealed nothing. She was 24 years old, with auburn hair she kept pinned severely back and green eyes that had seen far too much for her years. The men who came through rarely looked at those eyes anymore. They had learned that Eliza Hartwell did not speak, could not speak, and most had heard the whispered stories about why. Her husband had been a cruel man, a prospector named Dutch Hartwell, who had dragged her west with promises of gold and given her nothing but bruises and terror. For 3 years she had screamed for help that never came, screamed at the injustice of being trapped, screamed until her voice shattered like glass and left her with nothing but a raspy whisper that hurt too much to use. When Dutch finally drank himself to death 6 months ago, Eliza had not shed a single tear. She had simply started working at the saloon, communicating through nods and gestures and the occasional scrawled note. The cowboy who walked through the door that day was tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of creek water in summer. His name was James Sullivan, though most folks called him Sully, and he had just driven a herd of cattle up from Texas with his brother's outfit. He was 26, tired to his bones, and looking for nothing more than a cold beer and a quiet corner. What he found instead was Eliza. Sully approached the bar and removed his hat, revealing dark hair that needed cutting. "Beer, please," he said, his voice carrying the soft drawl of someone raised in the hill country. Eliza nodded and turned to pour, and Sully noticed immediately the way she moved, efficient but guarded, like a wild animal that had learned humans meant pain. When she set the beer in front of him, their fingers brushed for just a moment, and Sully saw something flicker in her eyes before she pulled away. He drank slowly, watching her work. Other men shouted their orders at her, impatient and rude, but Eliza never flinched. She simply filled their requests and collected their coins, her expression never changing. Sully found himself growing angry on her behalf, though he could not have said exactly why. There was something about her silence that felt like a wound, and something about the way she carried herself that spoke of a strength most men would never understand. When his beer was empty, Sully caught her attention and pointed to the glass. As Eliza refilled it, he said quietly, "Thank you." She paused, her eyes meeting his with surprise. It was such a small thing, common courtesy, but apparently rare enough in her world to be noteworthy. Sully saw her lips curve, just slightly, in what might have been the ghost of a smile. Over the next week, Sully found himself returning to the Silver Dollar every evening. He told himself it was because the beer was cold and the atmosphere was less rowdy than other establishments, but the truth sat in his chest like a weight he could not ignore. He was drawn to Eliza in a way that defied explanation. He began to notice things, the way she tucked a stray hair behind her ear when she was concentrating, the way she always gave generous pours to the ranch hands who treated her with respect, the way her shoulders tensed when certain men entered the saloon. He started to understand her language of gestures and expressions, reading meaning in the tilt of her head or the set of her jaw. One evening, a drunk miner grabbed Eliza's wrist as she passed his table, pulling her roughly toward him. "How about a smile, darling?" he slurred, his fingers digging into her skin. Eliza tried to pull away, her face paling, and Sully was on his feet before he had consciously decided to move. He crossed the room in 4 long strides and placed his hand on the miner's shoulder, his grip firm but not yet violent. "Let her go," Sully said, his voice level but carrying an edge of steel. The miner looked up, bleary-eyed and belligerent. "Mind your own business, cowboy. The lady and I are just having a friendly conversation." "The lady wants you to let her go," Sully said. "So you are going to do that, right now." Something in Sully's tone must have penetrated the miner's drunken haze because he released Eliza's wrist with a muttered curse. Eliza stepped back quickly, rubbing the red marks on her skin, her eyes wide as she looked at Sully. He met her gaze and saw gratitude there, and something else. A question, perhaps, or the beginning of trust. After that night, things shifted between them. Eliza began to seek out Sully's presence, bringing him his beer before he even asked, lingering near his table when the saloon was busy. Sully found himself staying later, helping her stack chairs and sweep floors after closing, their silence companionable rather than awkward. They communicated in glances and small gestures, and Sully discovered that Eliza was funny in her quiet way, rolling her eyes at pompous customers or making exaggerated faces that made him laugh. 2 weeks after they met, Sully brought a small notebook and a pencil to the saloon. He set them on the bar in front of Eliza during a quiet moment, and she looked at them, then at him, her expression uncertain. "Thought maybe you might want to talk sometime," Sully said simply. "If you felt like it, no pressure." Eliza stared at the notebook for a long moment, then reached out and touched it with one finger, as if it might disappear. When she looked back at Sully, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. She picked up the pencil with a trembling hand and wrote carefully, "Thank you." After that, the notebook became their bridge. During slow periods, Eliza would write things, observations about customers, questions about Sully's life, small jokes that made him grin. Sully learned that she had grown up in Missouri, the daughter of a school teacher and a seamstress. She had been educated, had loved reading and music, had dreamed of becoming a teacher herself. Dutch Hartwell had courted her with lies and charm. And by the time she realized the truth of his nature, she was already married and far from home. Her parents had both died of fever the year before she married, leaving her alone in the world. Dutch had isolated her on a remote claim miles from town, and when she screamed, there was no one to hear. Sully shared his own story in return, speaking softly while Eliza listened with an intensity that made him feel truly heard for the first time in his life. He told her about growing up on a small ranch in Texas, about his father who had died when Confederate deserters raided their property during the war, about his mother who had worked herself to exhaustion keeping the ranch going. He told her about his older brother who had eventually taken over the family land, and how Sully had chosen the life of a drover instead, restless and searching for something he could not name. Until now, he thought, watching Eliza's face in the lamplight. Until her. As the weeks passed, Sully's cattle drive companions began to notice his absence from their usual haunts. His best friend, a cowboy named Red Jenkins, cornered him one evening outside the saloon. "You are spending a lot of time here, Sully," Red observed, his tone carefully neutral. "That little bartender got you hooked?" Sully considered denying it, but found he did not want to. "Her name is Eliza," he said. "And yes, I suppose she does." Red studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. "She is the one whose husband used to beat her? Dutch Hartwell's widow?" "She is," Sully said, his voice hardening. "And if you have got something to say about that—" "Easy, friend," Red held up his hands. "I am not judging. Just want to make sure you know what you are getting into. A woman like that, she has got scars. Not all of them show." "I know," Sully said quietly, "but so do I. So does everyone. If you look close enough." Red clapped him on the shoulder. "Well then, I hope it works out for you. She could use someone decent in her corner." The conversation stayed with Sully as he entered the saloon. He found Eliza behind the bar, and when their eyes met, she smiled. A real smile this time. Small but genuine. His heart did something complicated in his chest, and he knew with sudden, absolute certainty that he was in love with her. The realization should have terrified him, but instead it felt like coming home. That night, after the last customers had stumbled out into the darkness, Sully helped Eliza clean up as he had been doing. But tonight, as she wiped down the bar, he reached out and gently touched her hand. She froze, her eyes flying to his face, and he saw the fear there, old and deep. Sully immediately released her, stepping back to give her space. "I am sorry," he said quickly. I did not mean to frighten you. He struggled to find the words. Eliza, I care about you a great deal, and I need you to know that I would never hurt you. Never. But I understand if you cannot trust that yet. Eliza stood very still, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Then slowly she reached for the notebook that now lived permanently on the bar. Her hand shook as she wrote, and when she turned it toward him, Sully's breath caught. I care about you too, but I am afraid. I know, Sully said softly. That is all right. We can go as slow as you need. I am not going anywhere. Eliza's eyes searched his face, looking for the lie, the trap, the hidden cruelty, but Sully simply stood there, open and patient, letting her look her fill. Finally, tentatively, she reached out and placed her hand in his. Her fingers were cold and trembling, but she did not pull away. Sully closed his hand gently around hers, his thumb brushing over her knuckles, and they stood there in the empty saloon as the oil lamps flickered and cast dancing shadows on the walls. The next morning, Sully went to see the saloon's owner, a shrewd businessman named Albert Carson. I want to talk to you about Eliza Hartwell, Sully said without preamble. Carson raised an eyebrow, leaning back in his chair. She is a good worker. I am not letting her go. I am not asking you to, Sully said, but I want to know about her situation. Does she have family, a place to stay, money saved? Carson studied him for a long moment. She lives in a boarding house 2 streets over, works 6 days a week here, dawn to midnight most days. I pay her fare, but it is not much. As for family, she has got no one that I know of. Why are you asking? Because I want to help her, Sully said, and I need to know what she needs. Carson's expression softened slightly. Look, Sullivan, I can see you have got feelings for the girl, but she has been through hell. Dutch Hartwell was a mean drunk, and he made her life a misery. Some women do not come back from that. Eliza is not some women, Sully said firmly. She is strong, stronger than anyone gives her credit for. She just needs a chance. Carson nodded slowly. All right then. You want to help her? Convince her to take Sundays off. I have been trying to make her rest, but she is terrified of not having enough money. If you can get her to take a day for herself, I will count that as a win. That evening, Sully broached the subject with Eliza, presenting it as a request rather than a demand. Would you spend Sunday with me? He wrote in the notebook, then slid it across the bar to her. Just the 2 of us, we could pack a lunch, ride out to the countryside. I want to show you that there is more to life than this saloon. Eliza read the words, her brow furrowing. She wrote back, I need to work. I need the money. Carson will give you the day off with pay, Sully wrote. I already asked him, please, Eliza, one day, that is all I am asking. Eliza bit her lip, uncertainty clear on her face. Then, slowly, she nodded. Sully felt his heart soar, and he had to resist the urge to sweep her into his arms. Instead, he simply smiled and wrote, Thank you. I promise you will not regret it. Sunday dawned clear and bright, the Arizona sky a brilliant blue unmarred by clouds. Sully borrowed a gentle mare from the livery stable and met Eliza outside her boarding house just after dawn. She emerged wearing a simple calico dress in soft blue, her auburn hair braided and pinned, and Sully thought she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. He helped her onto the mare, his hands careful on her waist, and mounted his own gelding. They rode out of Tombstone as the town was just beginning to stir, heading east into the rolling hills dotted with sagebrush and mesquite. They rode for an hour before Sully led them to a spot he had scouted earlier in the week, a small canyon with a spring-fed pool surrounded by cottonwood trees, a rare oasis of green in the harsh landscape. Eliza's eyes widened as they approached, and she slid down from her horse without waiting for help, walking toward the water as if drawn by a magnet. She knelt at the edge of the pool, trailing her fingers through the cool water, and when she looked back at Sully, her smile was radiant. They spread a blanket in the shade and unpacked the lunch Sully had prepared, bread, cheese, dried apples, and cold fried chicken from the boarding house kitchen. They ate slowly, and Sully talked, telling her stories about his drives up from Texas, about the strange things he had seen and the interesting people he had met. Eliza listened, laughing silently at the funny parts, her hand occasionally reaching out to touch his arm in response. After they ate, Sully pulled out the notebook. "Can I ask you something?" he wrote. Eliza nodded, and he continued, "Do you ever try to speak anymore, or does it hurt too much?" Eliza took the pencil, her hand hesitating over the paper. Finally she wrote, "I can whisper, but it hurts. And after Dutch died, I found I did not want to. Words never helped me before. Why would they help me now?" Sully read her response, his chest aching. He wrote, "Because you are free now, and because your voice matters, not for anyone else, for you." Eliza stared at the words for a long time. Then slowly she opened her mouth. "Sully," she whispered, the sound barely audible and clearly painful. But it was his name, and hearing it from her lips felt like a benediction. Sully reached out and took her hand, squeezing gently. "That is enough," he said. "You do not have to push yourself. I just wanted you to know that I want to hear everything you have got to say, however you want to say it." Eliza's eyes filled with tears, and she squeezed his hand back. They sat there by the water, hands clasped, and Sully felt something settle into place inside him. He loved this woman. He loved her strength and her resilience, her quiet humor, and her hard-won courage. And somehow, miraculously, he thought she might be beginning to love him too. As the sun climbed higher, they lay back on the blanket, watching the clouds drift by overhead. Sully pointed out shapes, a horse, a ship, a dragon, and Eliza laughed silently, shaking her head at his imagination. Eventually, emboldened by the peace of the moment, Sully rolled onto his side to face her. "Eliza," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something." She turned her head to look at him, her expression questioning. Sully took a deep breath. "I am in love with you. I think I have been since the first day I walked into that saloon. And I know you have been hurt, and I know you have every reason to be cautious. But I want you to know that I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. And if you will have me, I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never have cause to scream again. I will spend it making sure you have reasons to sing instead." Eliza's eyes went wide, tears spilling over to run down her temples. She sat up quickly, reaching for the notebook with shaking hands. She wrote furiously, the pencil scratching across the paper, and then thrust it towards Sully. "I love you too. I did not think I could feel this way again, did not think I wanted to, but you make me feel safe. You make me feel seen. You make me feel like maybe I could be whole again someday." Sully read the words, emotion welling up in his throat. He sat up and gently cupped Eliza's face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "You are already whole," he said fiercely. "Dutch Hartwell took a lot from you, but he did not break you. You are still here, still fighting, still capable of love. That is not broken, Eliza. That is miraculous." Eliza leaned forward until her forehead rested against his, her breath warm on his face. They stayed like that for a long moment, and then, very slowly, Eliza closed the distance between them and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was tentative, almost shy, but it was real, and it was choice, and Sully felt his heart expand with joy. He kissed her back gently, carefully, letting her set the pace, and when they finally pulled apart, Eliza was smiling through her tears. They spent the rest of the day by the pool, talking through the notebook and stolen kisses, planning a future that had seemed impossible just weeks before. Sully told her he had been saving money for years, enough to buy a small piece of land and start a ranch of his own. Eliza wrote about her dream of having a home again, a real home, with a garden and maybe some chickens, a place where she could feel safe. They wove their dreams together as the sun arced across the sky, and by the time they rode back to Tombstone, they were engaged, bound by promises spoken and written and felt in the marrow of their bones. The next weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Sully gave notice to his brother's outfit, explaining that he was done with droving and ready to settle down. He purchased 40 acres of land 20 miles north of Tombstone, in the foothills where there was good grass and reliable water. It was not much, but it was theirs. Eliza continued working at the saloon, but now she had light in her eyes that had not been there before. The other bartender, a good-natured woman named May, teased her mercilessly about her cowboy, and Eliza did not even pretend to mind. They were married on a Saturday afternoon in late October in the small church at the edge of Tombstone. Eliza wore a new dress that May had helped her sew, a soft green that matched her eyes, and she carried a bouquet of wildflowers that Sully had picked that morning. Red Jenkins stood up as Sully's best man, and May stood with Eliza. The ceremony was simple and brief, but when the preacher asked if they took each other as husband and wife, Eliza managed to whisper, "I do," her voice scratchy but audible, and there was not a dry eye in the church. After the ceremony, they had a small celebration at the Silver Dollar, with drinks on the house and a cake that May had baked. The townspeople who had known Eliza during her dark years with Dutch Hartwell marveled at the transformation in her, the way she glowed with happiness, the way she leaned into Sully's side as if she belonged there. And Sully, who had spent so many years rootless and searching, finally understood what home meant. They moved to their land the next day, to the small cabin that Sully had been building with the help of Red and some of the other cowboys. It was rough still, with gaps in the walls that would need chinking and a roof that would need reinforcement before winter, but Eliza walked through it with wonder, touching the walls and the furniture that Sully had painstakingly built. This was hers. This was theirs. No one could take it away. That first night they lay together in the bed Sully had constructed, wrapped in blankets against the desert chill. Eliza rested her head on Sully's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, and felt a peace she had not known in years. Sully stroked her hair, marveling at the fact that this incredible woman was his wife, that he got to wake up beside her every morning for the rest of his life. "Eliza," he murmured into the darkness, "are you happy?" She lifted her head to look at him, and even in the dim moonlight filtering through the window, he could see her smile. She pressed her hand over his heart and nodded, then leaned up to kiss him. When she pulled back, she whispered, her voice rough but determined, "So happy." The winter that followed was hard work, but filled with joy. Sully and Eliza worked side by side to winterize the cabin, to build a barn for the few horses and cattle they had purchased, to prepare for the harsh months ahead. Red came by often to help, and May visited when she could, bringing supplies from town and gossip that made Eliza laugh. Slowly, painfully, Eliza's voice began to return. It would never be what it had been. The damage was too extensive, but with practice and patience, she learned to speak in a low, husky tone that Sully found beautiful. She sang sometimes while she worked, old hymns and folk songs from her childhood, and Sully would stop whatever he was doing just to listen. In the spring, Eliza discovered she was pregnant. She told Sully one evening over dinner, speaking the words carefully, "We are going to have a baby." Sully stared at her for a long moment, the words not quite processing, and then he let out a whoop of joy that probably carried all the way to Tombstone. He swept Eliza into his arms, spinning her around until she was breathless with laughter, and then set her down gently, as if she were made of glass. "Are you sure?" he asked, his hands on her shoulders. "Are you all right? Do you need to see a doctor?" "I am sure," Eliza said, her voice warm with amusement, "and I am fine." May recommended a midwife in town, a woman named Mrs. Patterson who delivered half the babies in Cochise County. "I will go see her next week." "I will take you," Sully said immediately, "and we will get whatever you need, anything at all." Eliza cupped his face in her hands, her eyes soft. "I just need you," she said. "You are all I need." The pregnancy was not easy. Eliza was often sick in the early months, and Sully hovered anxiously, trying to help, and mostly getting in the way. But as her belly grew and the baby began to kick, Eliza bloomed with happiness. She would take Sully's hand and place it on her stomach so he could feel their child moving, and the wonder on his face never failed to make her smile. They spent long evenings planning, choosing names, imagining what their son or daughter would be like. Sully added a room onto the cabin for the baby, working late into the night by lantern light, determined that his child would have everything he had not. Their son was born on a cold November morning, after a labor that lasted through the night and left Eliza exhausted but triumphant. Sully had stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her brow, murmuring encouragement even when she could not respond. When Mrs. Patterson finally placed the squalling infant in Eliza's arms, Sully felt tears streaming down his face. The baby had Eliza's auburn hair and what would clearly be Sully's creek water eyes, and he was perfect. They named him Thomas, after Sully's father. Eliza whispered the name to her son as he nursed for the first time, and Sully sat beside them on the bed, his arm around his wife, his eyes on his child, thinking that he had never imagined he could be this happy. Thomas was a healthy, lively baby who kept them both busy and sleep-deprived. Eliza took to motherhood with a fierce protectiveness, determined that her son would grow up knowing only love and safety. Sully was a devoted father, wearing the baby in a sling while he did chores, singing off-key lullabies that made Eliza shake her head in mock despair. Their little ranch prospered, slowly but steadily. Sully had a good eye for cattle, and the herd grew year by year. Eliza planted a garden that flourished in the Arizona sun, and she kept chickens that provided eggs and meat. They were not rich, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. When Thomas was 2, Eliza became pregnant again. This time it was easier, her body knowing what to do, and their daughter was born on a warm spring evening with much less drama than her brother's arrival. They named her Sarah Grace, and she had her mother's green eyes and her father's easy smile. Thomas was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything, and Sully and Eliza fell in love all over again watching their children together. As the years passed, their family grew and deepened. Thomas turned out to be quiet and thoughtful, with his mother's sensitivity and his father's steady nature. Sarah was bold and adventurous, climbing everything in sight and giving her parents constant heart attacks. A third child arrived when Thomas was 5 and Sarah was 3. Another son they named Daniel, who was sweet-tempered and gentle, fascinated by animals and growing things. Red Jenkins became a fixture in their lives, a beloved uncle to the children who brought them peppermints from town and taught them to ride. May eventually married the owner of the mercantile and moved north to Prescott, but she and Eliza maintained a faithful correspondence, their friendship enduring across the miles. Sully's brother visited once, meeting Eliza and the children for the first time, and declared himself impressed that his restless younger brother had built such a good life. Eliza's voice never fully recovered, but it no longer mattered. She could speak well enough to sing to her children, to tell Sully she loved him, to call out warnings when the little ones were getting into mischief. And Sully had learned to hear everything she never said anyway, reading her moods in the tilt of her head, her opinions in the set of her shoulders, her love in the way she looked at him across the dinner table when the children were arguing and the house was chaotic and life was beautifully, wonderfully messy. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Sully surprised Eliza with a piano that he had saved for over 2 years to purchase. He had it hauled out to the ranch on a wagon, and when Eliza saw it, she burst into tears. "You remembered," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Of course I remembered," Sully said, pulling her close. "You told me you used to play back in Missouri. I thought maybe you would like to again." Eliza had not touched a piano in over a decade, and at first her fingers were clumsy on the keys. But muscle memory returned, and soon she was playing every evening, filling their home with music. The children would gather around, Thomas learning the basics from his mother, Sarah preferring to sing along with her strong, clear voice, Daniel just content to listen. And Sully would sit in his chair watching his family and think about the silent woman he had met in a saloon a decade ago, and the life they had built from ashes and pain and stubborn hope. When Thomas turned 16, tall and broad-shouldered like his father, he announced his intention to join Sully in running the ranch full-time rather than pursuing more schooling. Sully was secretly pleased, though he made sure Thomas understood it was his choice. Sarah, at 14, declared she wanted to be a teacher like her grandmother had been, and Sully and Eliza made arrangements for her to attend a school in Tucson. Daniel, at 12, was still figuring out his path, but he had a gift with horses that suggested he might become a breeder or trainer. Sully and Eliza watched their children grow and change, guiding when they could, stepping back when they must, marveling at the people they were becoming. 20 years after that first meeting in the Silver Dollar Saloon, Sully and Eliza sat on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sunset paint the Arizona sky in shades of gold and crimson. The house had been added onto several times over the years, sprawling and comfortable, filled with the evidence of a life well lived. Children's drawings pinned to walls, books stacked on every surface, a well-worn piano in the parlor. Thomas was married now, to a kind-hearted girl from Tombstone, and they had given Sully and Eliza their first grandchild, a baby girl. Sarah was teaching at a school in Phoenix, coming home for holidays and regaling them with stories about her students. Daniel was working at a horse ranch near Tucson, learning the trade and saving money to start his own business someday. "Can you believe it?" Sully said, reaching over to take Eliza's hand. 20 years. Eliza squeezed his fingers, her smile soft in the fading light. Her hair was threaded with silver now, and there were lines around her eyes, but to Sully she was just as beautiful as the day he first saw her. "Best 20 years of my life," she said, her voice still husky but warm with contentment. "Mine too," Sully said. He was quiet for a moment, then added, "Do you ever think about how things might have been different if I had not walked into that saloon that day?" Eliza considered the question, her thumb rubbing over his knuckles. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but not with regret. Everything I went through, as terrible as it was, led me to you, led me to this life. I would not change that." "You are stronger than anyone I have ever known," Sully said, bringing her hand to his lips. "You know that, right?" "I am strong because you taught me I could be," Eliza said. "You saw me when I was invisible. You heard me when I had no voice. You loved me when I did not think I could be loved. That is what made me strong, Sully. You did that." "We did it together," Sully corrected gently. "You did the hard work. I just stood beside you while you did it." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge, one by one, in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the barn, a horse whickered softly. In the distance, a coyote called to its pack. And in the house behind them, the piano stood silent but ready, waiting for the next time Eliza felt moved to play, to fill their home with music once more. "Sully?" Eliza said after a while, her voice quiet. "Yes, love?" "Thank you for everything, for seeing me, for hearing me, for loving me." Sully turned to look at her, this woman who had survived so much, who had rebuilt herself from ruins and taught him what true strength looked like. "No, Eliza," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for letting me in, for trusting me with your heart, for building this beautiful life with me. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, and I will spend every day I have left making sure you know it." Eliza leaned over and kissed him, soft and sweet, a kiss that held 20 years of love and partnership and mutual respect. When they pulled apart, she rested her head on his shoulder, and Sully wrapped his arm around her, holding her close. They sat there, as the night deepened around them, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built something lasting and true from pain and silence and the courage to hope. The ranch that had started as 40 acres and a rough cabin had grown into a thriving operation. The woman who had lost her voice to years of screaming had found it again in a home filled with love and laughter. And the cowboy who had been searching for something he could not name had found it in the green eyes of a silent bartender and the life they had created together. Their grandchildren would grow up hearing the story of how their grandparents met, the cowboy and the woman who could not speak, and how he had learned to hear everything she never said. They would hear about the little ranch in the Arizona foothills, about the hard work and the love that built it, about the way their grandmother's voice had returned slowly, painfully, like a flower pushing through cracked earth toward the sun. They would learn that strength comes in many forms, that love can heal even the deepest wounds, and that sometimes the greatest courage is simply refusing to give up. As Sully and Eliza sat together under the stars, they knew their story was far from over. There would be more grandchildren to spoil, more challenges to face, more years to live and love and grow old together. But whatever came, they would face it, as they had faced everything, together. Partners in every sense of the word, their hearts beating in sync like the rhythm of a song only they could hear. The silence between them now was not the silence of pain or loss or voicelessness. It was the silence of understanding, of two souls so attuned to each other that words were often unnecessary. But when words were needed, Eliza had them now, her voice a gift she had reclaimed one painful whisper at a time. And Sully was there to listen, as he had always been, hearing not just her words, but everything behind them. The love, the trust, the bone-deep contentment of a woman who had found her home at last. Inside the house, the piano waited. Outside, the ranch spread across the land they had worked so hard to tame. Above, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human joy and human sorrow alike. But here, on this porch, in this moment, Sully and Eliza Sullivan sat wrapped in each other's arms and counted themselves blessed beyond measure. Their children were grown and thriving. Their grandchildren were healthy and loved. Their land was fertile and productive. And after 20 years, their love burned as bright as it had that first day by the spring-fed pool, when Sully had told Eliza she was already whole, and she had believed him enough to try. "Should we go in?" Sully asked eventually, as the night grew cool. "You will catch a chill out here." Eliza shook her head, burrowing closer. "Not yet," she said. "Just a few more minutes. I want to remember this." "Remember what?" Sully asked, pressing a kiss to her hair. "This," Eliza said simply. "Us. Here. Now. Perfect." And it was perfect, Sully thought, not in the sense of being flawless or easy or without struggle, but perfect in the way that mattered. Two imperfect people who had found each other and chosen each other and built something beautiful together. Perfect in the way that love always is when it is true and deep and earned through years of showing up, of listening, of seeing each other clearly and loving what they saw. They sat there until the moon rose high and bright, casting silver light across their land, their home, their life. And when they finally went inside, fingers intertwined, they carried with them the certainty that whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together. The cowboy who had learned to hear everything his wife never said, and the woman who had lost her voice to years of screaming and found it again in love, they had built something that would last. A legacy not just of land and cattle, but of courage and resilience and the transformative power of being truly, completely seen. Their story would become legend in those parts, told and retold around dinner tables and campfires, an inspiration to anyone who had ever felt broken or voiceless or lost. And at the heart of it would always be this simple truth, that love, real love, is not about grand gestures or perfect words. It is about showing up. It is about listening. It is about seeing another person in all their pain and beauty and complexity and choosing them anyway, every single day. Sully and Eliza Sullivan lived long, full lives on their Arizona ranch, surrounded by children and grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren, all of whom knew without question that they were loved. And when they died many years later and within months of each other, they were buried side by side on a hill overlooking their land. Their headstones simple, but bearing an inscription that captured everything they had been to each other. He heard. She spoke. Together, they sang. The ranch passed to Thomas and his descendants, who maintained it with the same care and dedication that Sully and Eliza had shown. The piano stayed in the parlor, played by generation after generation, the music that Eliza had reclaimed filling the house she had made into a home. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blew just right across the Arizona hills, the family swore they could hear it. Two voices harmonizing perfectly, singing the song of a love that had conquered silence and pain and emerged stronger for the struggle. It was a legacy worth leaving, a story worth telling, a love worth celebrating, and in the end, that was all that mattered. Not the hardship they had endured, but the beauty they had created from it. Not the voice that was lost, but the understanding that was found. Not the silence that had nearly destroyed her, but the music they had made together when she learned to sing again. Sully had been right that first day by the pool, when he had told Eliza she was already whole. But he had also given her something precious, the safe space to discover that wholeness for herself, to rebuild and reclaim and rise from the ashes of her old life into something new and true and entirely her own. And Eliza, in turn, had given Sully purpose and home, and a love deep enough to anchor a restless soul. They had saved each other in all the ways that mattered, and they had lived, truly lived, every day they were given. What more could anyone ask for? What more could anyone want? In a life measured not by wealth or status, but by love and connection, and the courage to keep choosing hope even when hope seemed foolish. In that life, Sully and Eliza Sullivan were the richest people in the world. And so their story ends where all the best stories do, not with a dramatic climax or a shocking twist, but with the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived, a love well tended, and a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. The cowboy and the voiceless woman had found each other in a dusty Arizona saloon in 1882, and they had built a life that proved beyond any doubt that healing is possible, that love can triumph over trauma, and that sometimes the most important conversations are the ones that happen in silence, speaking to heart in a language only they can understand.